In 1984, a skinny shooting guard from North Carolina was passed over by two teams before the Chicago Bulls finally took a chance on him. Scouts said he was talented, but undersized for greatness. Nobody could have predicted that this same player would go on to redefine an entire sport, win 6 championships without ever losing a single NBA Finals, and become the most recognizable athlete on the planet. This is the story of the boy who was once cut from his own high school varsity team and grew into the man the world simply calls the greatest of all time. This is the story of Michael Jordan. Michael Jeffrey Jordan was born February 17, 1963, in Brooklyn, New York, the fourth of 5 children born to James and Dolores Jordan. When Michael was still a toddler, the family relocated south to Wilmington, North Carolina, where his father worked as an equipment supervisor at a General Electric plant, and his mother worked at a local bank. It was a working, disciplined household. Hard work and personal responsibility were non-negotiable values drilled into all 5 Jordan children from an early age. As a boy, Michael was intensely competitive, often to a fault, turning even simple backyard games with his older brother Larry into fierce, sometimes tearful battles neither of them wanted to lose. Larry, in fact, was considered by many in the family to be the more naturally gifted athlete of the two, a fact that lit a fire under young Michael that never really went out. The moment that became central to his origin story happened during his sophomore year at Emsley A. Laney High School. Standing only about 5'10" at the time, Michael tried out for the varsity basketball team and was cut, with coaches instead selecting a taller classmate they believed had more physical potential for varsity play. Michael was devastated. He has said in later interviews that the humiliation of that day became fuel he carried with him for the rest of his career, a memory he returned to again and again whenever he needed extra motivation. Rather than give up, Michael spent that entire summer waking up before school to practice alone on a backyard hoop his father had built, working obsessively on his footwork, his jump shot, and, as a growth spurt finally arrived, his leaping ability. By his junior year, he'd grown several inches and earned a spot on varsity. By his senior year, he was a McDonald's All-American, one of the most highly recruited high school players in the entire country. The kid who'd once been told he wasn't good enough was about to prove, over and over, exactly how wrong that judgment had been. Jordan has often said that image of the cut list posted on the locker room door, his name missing from it, remained burned into his memory for the rest of his life. Replaying it before big games, decades into his professional career as motivation whenever he felt himself losing focus. Jordan accepted a scholarship to the University of North Carolina, where legendary head coach Dean Smith ran one of the most respected, disciplined programs in college basketball. As a freshman in 1982, playing under a program known for developing team-first, fundamentally sound players rather than showcasing individual stars, Jordan was given a chance that would change everything. In the 1982 NCAA championship game against Georgetown, with the Tar Heels trailing by 1 point and just seconds remaining on the clock, freshman Michael Jordan calmly caught a pass on the left wing and sank the game-winning jump shot, delivering North Carolina the national championship. It was a shot that instantly made him a household name in college basketball circles, and a preview of the ice-cold competitive nerve that would define his entire career. He spent 3 years at North Carolina, developing not just his scoring ability, but a complete, versatile game: defense, rebounding, playmaking, under Dean Smith's exacting system. By his junior year, he'd swept both National College Player of the Year awards, and it was clear Jordan had outgrown the college game entirely. In 1984, he declared for the NBA draft. Beyond that single iconic shot, Jordan's time at North Carolina taught him something that would define his entire career: the discipline of a team system, rather than pure individual flash. Dean Smith was famously reluctant to let any single player, even a supremely talented one, dominate the ball or the spotlight, a philosophy that initially frustrated Jordan's competitive instincts, but one he later credited with building the all-around fundamentals, defensive intensity, and basketball IQ that separated him from purely athletic scorers throughout his professional career. The 1984 NBA Draft is remembered today as one of the most consequential in league history, largely because of who was passed over before Jordan's name was finally called. The Houston Rockets selected Hakeem Olajuwon first overall, a reasonable choice given his dominant college career. The Portland Trail Blazers, picking second, chose center Sam Bowie instead of Jordan, reportedly prioritizing positional need and concerns about Jordan's size, translating to the professional game, a decision that would go down as one of the most infamous draft mistakes in sports history. With the third overall pick, the Chicago Bulls selected Michael Jordan. He made an immediate impact, averaging over 28 points per game as a rookie and earning NBA Rookie of the Year honors for the 1984-85 season. His combination of explosive athleticism, scoring instinct, and sheer competitive will made him must-watch television almost overnight, drawing comparisons to legends before he'd even played a single playoff game. But early Bulls teams around him were thin, and for years, individual brilliance alone wasn't enough to get past the league's true contenders. That same rookie year, Jordan signed a groundbreaking endorsement deal with Nike, a company that was, at the time, a distant third in the basketball shoe market behind Converse and Adidas. Nike bet heavily on Jordan specifically, building an entire signature shoe line and marketing campaign around him rather than treating him as one athlete among many, a gamble that would go on to transform Nike into the dominant force in sports apparel within just a few years. Throughout the mid to late 1980s, Jordan's individual scoring numbers were nothing short of remarkable. He'd go on to average over 37 points per game during the 1986-87 season, one of the highest single-season scoring averages in NBA history. Yet year after year, his Bulls ran into the same wall: the Detroit Pistons, a physical, defensively ruthless team nicknamed the Bad Boys, who developed a deliberate defensive strategy specifically built to punish Jordan physically every time he drove to the basket, a tactic that became known as the Jordan Rules. Detroit eliminated Chicago from the playoffs in 1988, 1989, and again in 1990, each defeat more painful than the last. Jordan later described this period as the most frustrating stretch of his career, proof that individual talent alone, without the right team infrastructure and physical toughness, wasn't going to be enough to reach the top of the league. It was during these years that Jordan began working obsessively in the weight room, adding muscle to his frame specifically to withstand Detroit's punishment, while Bulls management built out a stronger supporting roster around him, most notably pairing him with a gifted young forward named Scottie Pippen. The losses to Detroit stung deeply, but they also forged the version of Jordan who would soon become unstoppable. This era of the NBA was also defined by fierce rivalries, with players like Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, whose Boston Celtics and Los Angeles Lakers teams had dominated the league throughout the 1980s. Jordan idolized both men's competitiveness while quietly studying every advantage they had that he still lacked: team chemistry, veteran physicality, championship experience. Rather than resent the gap between his individual brilliance and their team success, he treated it as a blueprint, absorbing lessons from both legends while waiting for his own roster to catch up to his talent. In 1991, everything finally came together. Under new head coach Phil Jackson's triangle offense system, and with a fully matured, physically dominant supporting cast, the Chicago Bulls finally broke through, defeating their tormentors in Detroit in the Eastern Conference Finals before sweeping past the Los Angeles Lakers to win Jordan's first NBA championship. Jordan, overwhelmed with emotion, was famously photographed sitting on the locker room floor after the game, clutching the championship trophy and sobbing. It was the beginning of one of the most dominant runs in sports history. The Bulls repeated as champions in 1992, again defeating a strong Portland Trail Blazers team in the finals, and completed a three-peat in 1993 against the Phoenix Suns. Jordan was named NBA Finals MVP in all three championships, cementing his status not just as the league's best player, but arguably its most dominant winner in any sport, at any time. Off the court, his fame had grown into something the sporting world had never quite seen before. His partnership with Nike had produced the Air Jordan sneaker line, which became a global cultural phenomenon in its own right, transcending basketball entirely and reshaping the sneaker and sportswear industries permanently. In the summer of 1992, between his first and second championship runs, Jordan joined fellow legends Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and a roster of NBA All-Stars to form the United States men's basketball team for the Barcelona Olympics, a squad so dominant it became known simply as the Dream Team. They won every game by an average margin of more than 40 points, and the team's global tour through the Olympics is widely credited with single-handedly accelerating the worldwide popularity of basketball, turning Jordan from an American sports star into arguably the single most recognized athlete on the entire planet. Then, in the summer of 1993, tragedy struck. Jordan's father, James Jordan Sr., the man who had built him that first backyard hoop, who had shaped his entire competitive character, was murdered during a robbery while resting at a highway rest stop in North Carolina. The loss devastated Jordan profoundly. Just months later, still processing his grief, Jordan announced his retirement from basketball at the height of his powers, stunning the sports world. He said simply that he had lost the desire to play the game his father loved watching him play. In a decision many still find remarkable, Jordan then pursued a professional baseball career, signing a minor league contract with the Chicago White Sox organization and playing a full season for their Double-A affiliate, the Birmingham Barons, a humbling, largely unsuccessful experiment by his own admission, but one that many believe helped him quietly work through his grief, away from the intense spotlight basketball had placed on him. Those close to Jordan during this period describe a man who was, for the first time in his adult life, forced to sit with grief rather than outwork it. Baseball offered him something basketball no longer could in that moment: anonymity, a fresh challenge with no expectations attached, and long bus rides through minor league towns far removed from the pressure of being the most famous athlete in the world. He hit only .202 that season for Birmingham, a modest return by professional standards, but he later described the experience as one of the most meaningful and clarifying periods of his entire life. It was for a brief period entirely uncertain whether the greatest basketball player of his generation would ever return to the sport at all. In March 1995, after a year and a half away, Jordan announced his return to the NBA with a now famous two-word press statement: "I'm back." He rejoined the Bulls partway through the season, initially looking rusty after his time away from the game, but by the following season, he was fully restored to his previous dominant form. The 1995-96 Bulls, featuring Jordan alongside Pippen and newly acquired forward Dennis Rodman, won a then-record 72 regular season games and captured Jordan's fourth championship. It was the beginning of a second three-peat, with Chicago winning again in 1997 and 1998. The 1997 finals produced one of the most legendary individual performances in sports history. Game 5 against the Utah Jazz, remembered as the flu game, in which a visibly ill, severely dehydrated Jordan somehow scored 38 points and delivered a crucial game-winning assist, having to be physically supported by teammates as he walked off the court afterward. The following year, in Game 6 of the 1998 finals, also against Utah, Jordan delivered what many consider the single greatest closing shot in basketball history, stealing the ball from Karl Malone, driving the length of the court, and sinking a fadeaway jump shot with just seconds remaining to secure his 6th championship, without ever having lost a single NBA Finals series in his career. He retired from the Bulls shortly afterward, his legacy already unquestionable. Jordan briefly returned to the NBA in 2001 to play 2 final seasons with the Washington Wizards, a stretch widely seen as a farewell tour rather than a genuine championship pursuit, before retiring for good in 2003. In 2009, he was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, delivering a famously candid, competitive speech that referenced many of the slights, both real and perceived, that had fueled him throughout his career. Beyond the court, Jordan's influence only continued to grow. He became majority owner of the Charlotte Hornets, formerly the Bobcats, in 2010, making him one of the very few former players to hold controlling ownership of an NBA franchise. His Jordan brand, built on the original Air Jordan partnership with Nike, grew into a billion-dollar business empire in its own right, one that continued expanding decades after his final game. Michael Jordan's cultural impact extended far beyond basketball statistics. He fundamentally changed how athletes could build personal brands, how sneakers were marketed and sold, and how competitive greatness itself was measured in American sports. Documentaries, books, and an entire generation of players who grew up idolizing him have continued to cement his legacy as, by nearly every measure, the player who redefined what it meant to be the greatest of all time. He was the kid who got cut from his own varsity team, who turned that single humiliation into decades of obsessive, relentless work, and in doing so, became proof that the distance between being overlooked and becoming unforgettable is often just a matter of refusing to accept the first answer the world gives you. In 2020, more than 2 decades after his final championship, a 10-part documentary series called The Last Dance chronicled the Bulls' final championship season in unprecedented detail, reintroducing Jordan's story and his fierce competitive mentality to an entirely new generation of viewers who had never seen him play live. The series became a cultural phenomenon in its own right, sparking fresh debates about his legacy and cementing, once again, that the story of Michael Jordan was never simply about basketball statistics. It was about an almost unmatched refusal to accept losing in any form, at any stage of life. Perhaps most tellingly, in a 2009 Hall of Fame induction speech that surprised many observers with its rawness, Jordan spent much of his time on stage recounting old slights, coaches who doubted him, players who talked trash, journalists who questioned him, rather than simply celebrating his accomplishments, a final public demonstration of the same restless, chip-on-the-shoulder competitiveness that had defined every chapter of his career, from that locker room cut list all the way to his 6th and final championship.